Well, isn't it wonderful? So President Trump got reelected, and we're just shouting for joy. And we've watched daily amazing things going on that we really weren't sure we would ever regain. But anyway, praise God. It is an answer to prayer and a lot of hard work too. Many of you spent numerous hours, blood, sweat, and tears, helping work toward that goal. So now we can just go back to our hammocks, right, and just enjoy the American dream. You know, I look around at my friends, I look at friends at church, and they're going, oh, okay, great. Okay, we got Trump elected, and
he's a president, not a king.
Right, he is. We know who the king is, don't we? But we have stuff going on in Texas, and that's why every day I really enjoy looking at the Texas Minute that comes in from Texas Scorecard. It's a very, very brief little buttons that you can punch and learn about what's going on here in Texas and action alerts that we can take care of here. But if we don't keep the pressure on in Texas, honestly, there's a lot to lose right here in Texas. And is Texas the reddest state? Is Montgomery County the reddest county? I hope so. But we cannot go back to the hammock. So our board wanted to invite Brandon Waltens. We've had Michael Quinn Sullivan a couple of times before. And Brandon is also a journalist. He's the senior editor for the Texas Scorecard. And in the past, he has managed successful campaigns for top conservative legislators. And he's served as chief of staff at the Texas Capitol, too. He's not only a journalist, but of course he's a speaker, and he is very active along with Michael Quinn Sullivan and other Texas Scorecard journalists, ready to keep us informed. And he's helping to expose the establishment, the corruption in Austin, not only D.C. So, would you please help me welcome Brandon?
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm not tired of waiting yet. Yeah, I know everybody said it, but I'm not tired of waiting. But I do sometimes wonder if maybe he could slow down a little bit so I could enjoy each win a little bit longer. You know, you can't now. Okay. My name's Brandon Waltens. I'm the senior editor of Texas Scorecard. I know Michael, like she said, has been out here a couple times. I think y'all watched one of our documentaries last month, Hubris. But how many of y'all have heard of Texas Scorecard? Maybe you follow us, get our emails. Okay, most of y'all, excellent. So for those of you who don't know, Texas Scorecard, we're a nonprofit media organization that focuses a little bit on federal stuff. Certainly there's been a lot of good federal news lately, right? We could sit here and talk about all the wins and how amazing it's been. Like, you know, just as a side note, what does it say that, like, we can be so giddy and, like, almost brought to tears just because somebody we elected, like, is doing what they said they would do, right? That's how low the bar had become in D.C., right? But it is amazing. And so we do, we focus a little bit on federal stuff. We do a little bit of local news as well, especially as we see that, you know, if something's happening in one city or one county or one school district, chances are it's happening in other parts of the state. And so we'll try to expose some of the local stories to the extent that we have the bandwidth to do that. But I would say that most of our coverage, most of our focus is put on what happens at the state capitol in Austin. And while we can celebrate what's happening in Washington, D.C., I'll tell you, we have to keep our eye on the ball because right now there's a fight happening in Austin, and it involves all of us as conservatives, all of us as voters, and it really has the ability to define the trajectory of the state, for the next years, the next decades going forward. And that is the fact that, unfortunately, some of you may have thought, well, Republicans won big in Texas, and that's true. Donald Trump won, more of Texas than he had in any other previous election. 12 of the 14 border counties. I mean, you look at that map, right? It's wild. We actually gained seats in the Texas Senate and the Texas House. And you had seats that were Democrat flipped to Republican, some seats that hadn't been Republican in 100 years, right? So major wins. And yet, I hate to put a little bit of the damper now as we kind of get into the reality of it, but the fact of the matter is that currently, right now in Austin, Democrats are controlling our Texas legislature. And specifically, they're controlling the Texas House. And people say, well, how could that be? We've got majorities. We just said we grew majorities. And that's right. The Texas House is 150 seats. 88 of them now are held by Republicans. Okay, so you've got 88 Republicans, 62 Democrats. And yet, Democrats are choosing the Speaker of the House. They're more empowered than they've been before. And it really raises a question about whether or not we're going to continue to see, we see the wins happening for President Trump. Are we going to see those wins happen in Texas? And the answer is that it all comes down to what we do and how active we are as the legislative session continues. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've seen happen in the Texas House over the past few weeks that they've been in session. And then I'll talk a little bit about, I'll go through some of the Republican Party of Texas's priorities, which are things that they're down there in the Capitol advocating for. And then the governor as well had his State of the State address on Sunday of this last week. So I'll talk about some of his priorities, and then I'll try to take as many questions as I can afterwards, so I can make sure I'm talking about what we want to talk about. So to talk about the Texas House, I think we have to go back to last session. So, a year and a half ago, you had something happen in the Texas House that I think really set some dominoes into effect. And that was the fact that on Memorial Day weekend, while people were, not paying attention to the Texas legislature, that's for sure, on that Saturday, the Texas House decided that they would impeach the most conservative attorney general in the country, Ken Paxton. And I think that set into place a domino effect that led to some major reforms and some major changes happening. At least more people paying attention than ever. Now we know that whenever that trial went to the Senate, he got acquitted on all the counts. But that didn't stop there. You saw a major turnover happen in the primary elections last year. In fact, just on the Republican side of things, we actually, because of people leaving or people who were forced out in primary elections, incumbents that were kicked out, we had, I believe, 27 new Republicans coming in, which is, for context, that's a really big turnover for the legislature. So you had Democrats too, they switch out. And so you had like 30, 40 new members coming into the 150 member body. It normally isn't that large, okay? But there had been a mandate. And there had been a mandate because of the Ken Paxton impeachment. There had been a mandate because of school choice legislation that was the governor's top priority last time. And there were a number of these factors. But at the heart of it was that I think more people, because of what we've seen happen from the federal level on down, more people now are waking up to what's actually happening in their state capital, city hall, U.S. Capitol, versus what they're being told sometimes by elected officials. I think you have more people that are waking up to that. And you have people that are saying, look, we expect you when we send you to Austin to go do what you campaigned on, right? I mean, what a concept, right? Isn't that amazing? And again, right, that would be an amazing thing if people did that. So a lot of these people, I'd say the majority, vast majority of these incoming freshmen that were just sworn in a few weeks ago, were people who campaigned on reform. And by reform, I mean things like, let's have Republicans choose the Speaker of the House, right? Which sounds like a no-brainer, right? Let's not put Democrats in charge of committees, right? Let's not let them have the control over whether or not conservative legislation passes or dies. Let's prioritize conservative legislation. We can pass, your road renaming bills and things like that. We can do that as time allots, but let's make sure we're prioritizing the conservative legislation, conservative priorities that we were sent here to do, because we've only got a limited amount of time here, right? We got a 140-day session. Let's make sure that we don't have a Democrat Obama lawyer serving as the parliamentarian, which we actually did, okay? Man, I can't make this up. Under Dave Phelan, then Speaker Dave Phelan, and before him Dennis Bonnen, you had a Democrat who worked in the Obama Lighthouse as a lawyer, being the parliamentarian. They was basically deciding, whether or not bills were good or bad, amendments were good or bad. And surprise, you watch him, he sided with the Democrats an awful lot of the time, right? So they said enough of that. So you have this growing group of members that from that primary, came out of that primary election, and during the last year said, we need to get rid of, first of all, we need to get rid of the current Speaker, Dave Phelan, but we need to not just do that, we need to put in a speaker who's actually going to commit to reforming the process so that the speaker doesn't play such a powerful role and that Republicans can actually run the chamber, which is, I think a novel idea, right? And so to give a little bit of the timeline on this, you had in December, or before December rather, but December you had a caucus meeting of the Republicans, okay? The Republican House Caucus, which is just another way of saying it's the group of Republicans that are in the House. So I said there were 88 Republicans in the House, means there were 88 members of the Republican House Caucus. They were to meet in December. Before then, you had a candidate for Speaker of the House, David Cook, that all of the reformers sort of rallied around and said, okay, we're gonna put our support behind him. He's pledged to do these things. That's going to be our guy. And so in December 6th, I believe it was, or 7th, yeah. December 7th, you had these Republicans meet in the Texas Capitol. They held their caucus meeting, and they were to decide a nominee for Speaker. The idea being that, it's sort of like our primaries, right? Meaning that instead of letting Democrats have an oversized say in who the Speaker is, where you only need, if you get all the Democrats right, and you do the math on it, you're like, well, if I just had a handful of Republicans, I could get the majority of the chamber, right? Instead of letting that happen, the concept has been, well, we're going to let the Republicans decide. They're going to choose a candidate. Republicans will then all vote for the same candidate because they pledged to do so. As Republicans, we're certainly not going to vote for the Democrats' choice for Speaker. A little bit of foreshadowing, and then that way Democrats are taken out of the process altogether. And this isn't that wild. When you look at what happens in Washington D.C., we can complain about a lot of the way the Capitol works in the House and Senate work up there, but they don't let Democrats choose the Speaker. Right? Whenever there's speaker races, it's all inside the Republican Party or the Democrat Party if they're in control, right? But they're not mixing. There's not this literal power sharing agreement like we see happen in the Texas Capitol and in the Texas House. And so before that vote was to take place, literally the day before, Dave Phelan reads the writing on the wall, sees he doesn't have the support to get the vote in caucus, and decides he's going to drop out. No sooner does he drop out than a new person comes in, right? And named by the name of Dustin Burrows. He's a representative from Lubbock. And he comes in, and does he go and say, I'm going to go talk to the Republican caucus. I'm going to see what they want. I'm going to make promises to them. No. Instead, one of his first meetings is to go speak to the Democrat caucus. Okay? Red flag number one, right? immediately goes to the Democrat caucus and tries to get their support. And by the way, the amazing thing is that because this is happening so late, because Dave Phelan dropped out so late, this actually comes with a silver lining, which is that all of this had to play out really in public. Whereas if he had dropped out earlier, this would have kind of happened behind the scenes. But because the clock was ticking so fast on this, you could just literally track what was happening. So he drops out, Dustin Burrows gets in, goes to the Democrats. Democrats are sort of tepid. They won't exactly come out and say they'll support him. The next day, the Republican caucus has their meeting. They vote. They elect David Cook as their nominee, right? The Republican nominee for Speaker. And then right after that happens, the Democrat caucus says, okay, well, actually, members are free to support whoever they want, but they can't support David Cook. And then Dustin Burrows, right after that vote, despite losing the Republican caucus vote, okay, because more Republicans said they wanted David Cook, it'd be like somebody who lost the primary, then goes and says, I've got enough votes for Speaker, I'm going to be the next Speaker, the Speaker race is over. And he says, he has the support of these many Republicans, these many Democrats, and I've got a majority of members on my side. Now, the funny thing is that after that happened, literally within hours, you had members coming off of that list, people who said, I never said that I was on that list, you didn't ask me. So you did have that happen. And ultimately what you ended up with was Dustin Burrows had a support list of more Democrats than Republicans. And so literally that same day, the 7th was a busy day, the SREC, State Republican Executive Committee, was also meeting in Austin, and they passed essentially a resolution saying that if members don't vote for the Republican nominee for Speaker, who at that point was David Cook, but if they don't vote for the Republican candidate for Speaker, that's going to be something that's eligible for censure, right? That's obviously censuring is a whole process, but they're saying that's something that we're going to consider a violation for potential censure, which actually means, it's not just a slap on the wrist anymore. If you went to the convention last time, you know that now we have the power to take people off the ballot as Republicans, right? Say you can run for office, but you're not going to run as a Republican if you're not going to support the Republican candidate. You're going to vote with Democrats, right? So the censure could really mean something this time. But it's going to be, I'm sure, challenged in court, and we'll have to watch how all that plays out. But they say, okay, support the Republican candidate. Fast forward, January 14th, first day of the session. How many of y'all were there the first day of the session? Took the buses? Great. Awesome. You had a good amount of folks show up there. It was very interesting. I saw, they wouldn't let, were you all able to get to the gallery, or did you have to watch the overflow room, right?
Senate gallery.
Yeah, the Senate gallery, yeah. Amazing, right? For some reason they didn't want the rabble, coming into the House. They said it was for safety. Even though you could watch, you could see there were plenty of seats. Anyway, that's another conversation. But they have the vote. There's 2 rounds of voting for Speaker because there's a third candidate who's a Democrat who has a very small amount of support, but she's sort of running to make a statement. So it forces it into 2 rounds to get a majority. And when all is said and done, you had 36 Republicans and 49 Democrats vote for Dustin Burrows. That is, for those of you bad at math, more Democrats than Republicans. And not only that, but there were 88 Republicans, 36 of them voted for Dustin Burrows. That means a minority of Republicans, right? So not only did he get more Democrat support for Speaker, Dustin Burrows, but actually most Republicans voted against him. And now he's the Speaker of the House. Okay? Again, I'm thankful that the timeline of this is such that we're actually seeing this play out in public, because I'll tell you, this isn't a new phenomenon. This is just playing out in a much more public way than we've seen before. Because if you look at how Dave Phelan became Speaker, if you look at how Dennis Bonner became Speaker, and talk to some of the members that were there during that time, they were getting support. They were trying to get support from Democrats and cobbling together support with Republicans. But it was all behind the scenes. And then by the time you got to day one of the Speaker vote, there usually wasn't another candidate. they get elected unanimously or almost unanimously because it was already sort of sewn up. So now you actually have this situation where we know exactly who it was on day one. We've got a list. You can look it up, right? You can see exactly who joined with Democrats and who voted for the Republican candidate, right? And there's just a minority of Republicans who did that, 36 of them. 36 Republicans voted with Democrats for the Speaker of the House, Dustin Burrows. Now, I'd say for Dustin, not off to a great start because he got the gavel, he won, but he's already started out a position where, Governor Greg Abbott had said they need to support the Republican nominee. Dan Patrick said they need to support the Republican, had some choice words for Dustin Burrows. Attorney General Ken Paxton, a number of these folks had spoken out. And so that's the position he finds himself in on day one. And so, what is his first move? Well, we're going to take a really long weekend, right? We're going to take like 5-day weekend, and I'm going to kind of circle back to this and figure out what's going on. By the way, these 5-day weekends, they've taken 4 or 5-day weekends every week that they've been in session now, which is like three weeks. It's amazing. I always think a 3-day weekend, you've heard of a 3-day weekend, that's from time to time. A 4-day weekend is sort of something special. A 5-day weekend, that's just normal, I guess, in the Texas Legislature. But it's not like time, it's of the essence, right? But they come back, and the next fight that we have is the rules. And traditionally, the rules vote is the next thing they need to vote on after the Speaker of the House. So if the Speaker of the House is selected on the first day, it's usually the next day, possibly the day after. It's usually within a few days. They'll vote for the rules. And essentially the rules are, exactly as they sound. We're going to agree on how we're going to, what committees we're going to have, what are the rules for debate, how we're going to organize ourselves throughout the next 140-day session. And rather than have that vote on the second day of session or the third day of session, it was actually over a week later, so already later than we've seen happen, that they finally brought up the rules. And they say, the author of the rules, let's say represented by Todd Hunter, who's the author of it, meaning his name is on it, says, all the members got this at the same time. Even the speaker hadn't seen these rules until I sent them out. He sent them out at 4:30 in the morning, okay? 4:30 in the morning, and it was 200-plus pages of rules. They're supposed to vote on it in the afternoon, right? Which had some members frustrated that they would be, forced this so quickly, especially because it was on a day where, a lot of them had to drive in, so it wasn't like they could just immediately get to work. They had to drive 3, 4, 5 hours to Austin and then maybe have a little bit of time. And had very little time to come up with amendments, right? You want to amend the rules, change them in some way. They didn't have time to do that. But the big headline from this drop of the rules that they wanted people to see was that the big headline was, we're not going to have Democrat chairs anymore. Which, if you only hear that, you think, well, that's fantastic. We've won, right? Because this is something that's been a priority of the Republican Party of Texas for the last couple sessions. It's been a big deal in the primary elections. I know that a lot of people have campaigned on this, saying we're not going to put Democrats in charge of committees in the Texas House. That makes no sense. And so here we are with these new rules that say Democrats can't, only Republicans can chair committees. And that would be a fantastic win, I think, if they had left it at that. But of course they didn't, right? Because who elected Dustin Burrows? The Democrats, right? So who is he more loyal to? The Democrats. So it says Republicans will serve as committee chairs. Oh, but all vice chairs have to be Democrats. Okay, strange. So we're going to put a ban on Republican vice chairs, right? Kind of looking at it a different way. But you think, okay, that's kind of okay. Vice chairs don't really have that much power. Well, then the rules go on to say, we're going to grant actually some additional power to the vice chair. They can if they want to bring up a bill and have a committee hearing on it, the chair has to let them do it. That's already more power than most of them already had, right? That they can actually gum up the works. If they say, I want a committee hearing on my gun confiscation bill that, has no chance of passing, even in the Texas House now. But, I could fill up 5-6 hours of people coming in, from Austin testifying for this. I could put anything I want to on the calendar for a committee hearing. They get that power. They also get the power that, they can call witnesses, they can do all these things. And then, this is like the kicker too, then they're also getting something that vice chairs have never had before, but they're getting a little stipend in their office budget. They get $4,000 extra a month to hire somebody else, which vice chairs didn't have before, right? And that adds up to people who are better at math than I. With the amount of chairs that they'll have and the amount of months, that's like an extra $3 million a year that we're paying for the staff that Democrat vice chairs are going to hire. So, think about that. Is Technolo's going to whatever progressive, Austin resident, they've got working in their office. And so that would be very bad. But it still goes on. And he says, actually, some of these committees, we've got too many, he said. So, if we had 36 committees before, I'm going to narrow it down to 30 or whatever it is now. And says, but I'm also going to create, we've never had this before, we're going to have permanent subcommittees. And essentially, I can refer bills directly to these subcommittees, just like I can with a committee. They're going to work essentially the same way. Only the subcommittees, I'm just going to call them subcommittees instead of committees. Oh, and there's no restriction on what party chairs those. So you actually see that there are some committees like, one I noticed was Juvenile Justice, which was chaired by a Democrat this last session. Now it's a subcommittee, where we'll see, the committee assignments haven't come out, but I assume that same Democrat will chair. And so the lesson here, right, is like, do we need to be more? I thought it was pretty clear what Republicans meant when they said ban Democrat chairs, right? You see the red shirts that the Republican Party of Texas has. And this is the equivalent of, the child that says, well, I'm not touching it, just trying to skate that line, right? Where, we banned Democrat chairs, but we gave them even more power as vice chairs than they ever had before. There's going to be more of them because there were maybe, I can't remember, 7 or 8 Democrat chairs last session. Now there's going to be 30 vice chairs, so half the Democrats are going to be vice chairs. And that doesn't even include however many of them end up being subcommittee chairs. Oh, and also, there's no restriction on the makeup of the committee. So you could have a Republican chair of the committee, but the committee itself could be made up of a majority Democrat. So you have like a committee of 7 people, 4 of them could be Democrats on there. You think, well, that wouldn't happen. Literally this last session, we had 2 of them that were 2 committees that were controlled, had more Democrats on them than Republicans. No other state does this. I want you to understand this. No other state has this kind of power sharing with Democrats that we see out here. They don't do it in D.C., right? Mike Johnson is, I'll get to that in a second. Yeah, who wrote the rules, I'll tell you. Mike Johnson, right, isn't putting AOC in charge of committees, right? You wouldn't expect that. And Nancy Pelosi, when she was Speaker, she wasn't putting, Republicans in charge of committees. You wouldn't expect her to do that, right? It doesn't make sense. But here in Texas, we've actually given more power to Democrats than we had before.
Why?
And so, because you can point that, because the Speaker owes his election to the Democrats more than he does to the Republicans. And because there's so far been no consequences for the Republicans that didn't do it, right? Or that voted with Democrats. I do think that will change going forward, but I'll get to that in a moment. They had but these were the rules that were voted on. Not only that, so some members had amendment ideas. Said, well, we're going to, we'd like to change this a little bit. We want to put in a restriction that Democrats can't make up a majority of a committee, or I want to amend it and have a vote on whether or not all the vice chairs have to be Democrat. Can we have a vote on that? I've never seen this happen before, but not to get too technical. Very rarely in the Texas House do they make what's called a motion for a previous question. Essentially what that means is they'll have the debate, they'll do the amendments, they'll stay there, they'll let Democrats do 40, 50 amendments on, anytime they have something like kind of a higher profile bill, they'll have the Democrats gum it up with amendments, and they'll spend all day there while Democrats stand there and call their racist and whatever else, and they'll let them do it. Calling the previous question essentially is a vote to stop the amendments and to then just pass the bill. And it's used very rarely in the Texas House. In fact, I think it's only been used like 8 times in the last decade. And every time it was after some super long debate where it was like, okay, we've had 50 amendments. The votes are all going the same way. Let's just, we're done, right? Instead, they don't get to a single amendment because you have a group of Democrats and Republicans who vote for, to move the previous question without any debate or any amendments. They have that vote and then they pass the rules as is. And then immediately, the Democrats go out, the Democrat House Caucus, chaired by a representative from not too far away from here, from Houston, Gene Wu, goes out and celebrates. They say, look at this, we've got more power than we've ever had because of these rules. Literally, that's what they're saying. They're out there saying it. If I'm them, I'm probably keeping quiet about it, right? But they're bragging about it, bragging about how they got so much power. And we find out, you think, okay, well, we find out a few days later, one of the lawmakers, I'm not sure who noticed it first, but Steve Toth was the one who asked the question, said, well, with these bills, when you look at them, they'll have little codes on the bottom from where they were drafted. There's an office called Legislative Counsel that actually writes the bills, and so they'll have, little coding at the bottom. Somebody noticed the initials HLB at the bottom of the rules in there. And Steve Toth asked, from the back microphone, asked on the floor of the House a few days after they had that vote, asked Speaker Dustin Burrows if HLB stood for Hugh Brady, who was the Democrat Obama parliamentarian I just mentioned. Yes, it is. He said, did Hugh Brady write these rules? Yes. So you literally have these rules that empower Democrats, written by a Democrat, and you have some Republicans, some of the establishment, more moderate Republicans, trying to spin this as some big win. And they immediately had their text messages ready to go. I just voted to ban Democrat chairs, right? They don't say any of the other stuff, right? They don't say that they voted to give them more power than they've ever had before. But I banned them from being chairs. We're just going to give them the power of a chair and call them the vice chair, right? No, they didn't say that. And so, that's what's happened so far. Then there was one other piece of legislation they're supposed to vote on, not legislation per se, but something called a housekeeping resolution, which is, again, not to get too in the weeds, but you've got the rules, which are how the House is going to operate. Housekeeping resolution is literally like it sounds. It's things like parking and office budgets and literally those sorts of housekeeping items. But there were some opportunities to make some good changes in there, like doing what they did in Congress to say, you can't use a restroom not based on your biological sex. Another Republican had an amendment that said you can't hire staff that are illegal aliens, or you can't, make people use your preferred pronouns or put that in your email bios, or they had all these great amendment opportunities. Well, this time they didn't even call the previous question, which is what they did before. Instead, this time, Dustin Burrows said, actually, we're just not going to vote on that at all. I'm just going to decide, the office budgets, and we'll take care of that. We don't need a housekeeping resolution to do that, which is amazing. I immediately asked Representative Briscoe Kane, who I had actually worked for before, but and he likes to go back in the rules. I asked him that day, I said, has this ever happened before? Because don't you normally need to pass like a housekeeping resolution that says we're going to have this office budget and this and that? And he looked back and got back like 100 years and couldn't find every session they had always passed this. But they've now decided they didn't have it. And so the only things that we've seen happen since then are recognitions, 3-day on the floor of the House. They passed a resolution very quickly, I will say, congratulating Beyonce after the Grammys this weekend. Spent a good amount of time on that, which would have been, well and good, except when you look at what's happening in the other chamber, right? So that's what the House has been up to. I'll let you say the House hasn't done much at all up to this point. And when you talk about that, some people will say, especially people who are with the establishment in the House, will say, well, that's not fair. What would we be doing right now? Well, you could have committees by now, right? The House doesn't even have committees at this time. Those haven't been done yet. And then you have, the governor's put out his priorities. Normally, the way the calendar works is for the first 60 days, they can't pass any legislation.
Will the group of big bumper please report the laser tag? I repeat, will the group of big bumper please report the laser tag? Your game is about to begin. Thank you and have an incredible night.
He's getting out. He's okay, that's my game, yeah. Normally during the first 60 days, they can't pass any legislation. Other than legislation that's deemed an emergency item by the governor. And so the governor held his State of the State address this last Sunday, where he laid out his emergency items, and he laid out 7 of them. And without looking, I'm going to try. School choice was unsurprisingly one of them. That was something that he's been pushing, right, for the last few years. And so school choice, some teacher pay raises, property tax relief, which is a big one, a water infrastructure fund, Texas Cyber Command, which I don't know too much about yet, but I like the way it sounds, but I don't know much about it yet. It just came out. The Texas Cyber Command, career readiness, training stuff, and there's the Rick Perry moment. I forgot the last one. But laid out these priorities. So they've got 7 items that they can, bail reform, that's it. Making it so that violent offenders can't be let out on the streets, right? Like we've seen in Harris County and so many other places. So that's 7 items that they could get to work on already. And in fact, the Senate took that one to heart. They passed their school choice bill yesterday. They spent a lot of time on it on the floor. It was a long debate, but last night they passed it out, sent it over to the House. They're already getting started. They're holding committee hearings on the bail reform bills next week, and they've already been talking about the budget and doing meetings on the budget. And so the Senate's been working really quickly. But the House doesn't even have committees yet. They're taking long weekends. And all of this matters because when you look at the timeline as a whole, you can kind of excuse it's early, they don't what else would they be doing this weekend? But when they start making excuses at this point in the session, remember it's 140 days. They'll make excuses now, right? But then you get to a point where you get towards the end of the session, and without fail, every single session I've watched, there are some number of conservative priorities that get killed by the calendar, which is to say, they run out of time, right? We've seen this happen time after time. And they'll say, we ran out of time. And they'll never say, maybe we shouldn't have taken a 5-day weekend in February, right? Maybe we should have had committee assignments a little sooner. Maybe we would have been able to pass that. No. Instead, I think safe assumption is a lot of the delays we see happen on the front end are specifically designed so that they have an excuse towards the end to not pass conservative legislation. Now, I don't want anything, that's sort of the update of where we are now. That's literally, it's been that crazy of a 3 weeks in many ways, and in other ways, It's been very similar to past sessions. The difference this time is that I've never seen more people engaged and involved. I really do mean that. And people who are seeing through this. I think normally if they tried this kind of thing, like the Democrat chair, the fake out ban of Democrat chairs, I think it would be really difficult, and I get it, because in their mind they're making the calculation, let somebody else try to explain this, right? Because they'll say, I banned Democrat chairs, and they're thinking their opponent will say, yeah, but actually you did this and that, right? And thinking, it's too complicated, people won't get it. I think people do get it. I think people do get it. Especially when they see, how about this? How about this for a thought exercise? This I'll say that I've said to anybody who tries to defend it. If the ban on Democrat chairs was exactly that, why did all the Democrats vote for it? Like all of the Democrats except for one voted for this. So did they vote to limit their own power, like voluntarily? I don't think so. So that's what we've seen happen so far in the House. But there is a lot of session left. I mean, we're not even a month into this legislative session. And it's not time to give up on, our conservative priorities are done. We're just going to kick our feet up and, wait till the next primary. We need to be pushing, I think, for these throughout the session if folks want to see them have a chance at passing. I think a lot of the issues we talk about, we haven't had a conservative speaker, I think we can all agree, in years, maybe ever, but certainly not in the last decade, right? And yet we have had legislative successes, right? And that's because there's been so much pressure put on them that they know they have to deliver something. And I think that pressure has only increased in recent years. And so I look at I pulled it up here because I certainly wasn't going to be able to remember these and the governor's priorities, but I look at these Republican Party of Texas priorities. By the way, were any of y'all at the convention, the Republican Party of Texas convention? Okay, wow, a lot of y'all. Okay, so then you know that as part of the Republican Party of Texas convention, they don't just elect the leadership and SREC and all that, but they do the platform, and then they do these legislative priorities as well, which is a relatively recent thing. But essentially the idea is this isn't an exhaustive list, but these are, we're going to vote, we're going to give you some priorities. These should be prioritized, right? They should be done first. They should be done early. And on this list here, right, border enforcement, talking about border enforcement, which, by the way, that problem has gotten a lot better on January 20th, by the way, we've seen. It's totally different. Yeah, it's totally different. We're seeing the lowest numbers of border crossings that we've seen, but there's still more work to be done. But, it's only been a couple weeks. It's amazing to see how it's dropped off, right? It's amazing to see how much easier it is to secure the border and stop the flow of illegals coming across when you actually don't have a government that's encouraging them to do so. Literally just stop encouraging it and flying them in and doing all that, and you could stop a lot of it right away, even before you build the wall, right? Amazing. Securing Texas elections, election integrity, obviously, something important. Stop sexualizing Texas kids. Yes. No Democrat chairs, which we talked about. Ban taxpayer-funded lobbying. This is always an interesting one to me, especially when people find out about this. The idea that sometimes our taxpayer dollars are being used to go down to Austin to go testify and go lobby against tax relief and things like that. Amazing. So banning taxpayer-funded lobbying, securing the electric grid, ending federal overreach. And this one I want to spend a few minutes talking about because I do think this is going to be very important. And they call this one Texas is not for sale, but it's the idea that we need to prevent foreign hostile countries like China, right? China, Iran, North Korea, Russia, but we're really talking about China, right? We need to stop them from owning land in Texas. Let me ask, because I always like getting a little bit of a pull on this. How much land do you think is acceptable for China or the Chinese Communist Party or citizens connected to China, citizens of China? How much is acceptable for them to own in Texas?
Zero.
None? Zero. Well, you might be considered an I agree with you, by the way. But you'd be considered maybe an extremist in the Texas Legislature because when they've had committee hearings on this over the last few months, even before the session started, immediately they were already like sacrificing the whole issue. And the conversation wasn't how are we going to ban China, Iran, etc. from buying land in Texas. It was how much land are we going to allow them to have, right? Which I think is totally the wrong thought. Frankly, I would actually, maybe I'd even go a step further if I was in charge. I'd say that maybe land ownership should be a privilege for United States citizens. You can't go to like these other countries, by the way. Try to go buy some land in China, right? Yeah, and yet we have it happen here. We have it happen where you have hundreds of thousands of acres of farmland, agricultural land near military bases in Texas.
Yeah.
And we've seen that other states have taken action on this. Arkansas has even taken action on this. Remember their governor, Huckabee Sanders, was one of the first bills that she signed. And they've already started to use it against some companies there. But I can tell you the amount of land, agricultural land, the Chinese own in Arkansas is much smaller than what they own in Texas, right? So Texas, we've got a big problem there. And that's something that the legislature could address. And that's something that's a priority of the party. We actually, on that same note, we did, I know you all saw the Hubris documentary last month that Michael put together, but he's also done another one that I really encourage you to watch as well, called Red Power, which actually I think sort of ties in two of the priorities here, which are the protecting Texas land, but also the electrical grid. Because, we have a situation where not only is China buying up land here, but they're also forcing all this wind power. All the windmills you see driving around and all that. Where those are built, right? They're built in China. And there's a plethora of problems with that. The documentary goes into it. I won't get into all of it, but suffice it to say, I think there's some real problems there that the legislature needs to address. So, all that to say, we've got our work cut out for us, right? But the most important thing we can do, and I say this as, I said we cover local, federal, state news at Texas Scorecard. We've got written articles, documentaries, videos, daily videos, whatever. Basically, there's a way people like to consume their news different ways. I know, and so we try to make it available in whatever way people prefer.
Is that Red Power on
But
your
whatever
website?
it is, yes, Red Power, yeah, all on our website. You can watch that there. But however you're getting news, we try to put it out there. But we do it not just so people can be informed. Being informed is a good thing. Probably better than not being informed. Although sometimes you wish like maybe you could just not know anything, right? Ignorance is bliss, right? Yeah. Maybe there's something to that. But no, okay, we probably have an obligation to be informed. But we have actually an obligation for more than that, right? Which is we want citizens to be informed and engaged, right? And so when I see groups like y'all's who have literally the legislative action, right? Which I think action, right? That's the perfect word. Because following this stuff is more than just reading articles or yelling at the TV, right? It's actually picking up the phone and calling your state representative, writing them, coming to the Capitol if you can do that, showing up at their district office, etc. Any of these ways, getting involved in the process, that's the only reason we've seen success, why we've seen conservative priorities pass in past sessions, and it's the only thing that's keeping it up now. They are terrified of another electoral wipeout like they saw happen this last primary. They're terrified of that happening again. And already some of them made their very first vote a pretty bad one, right? A pretty bad one. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have time to redeem themselves, but, the clock is ticking. The clock is ticking on the session. And so, regardless of what happens, it's important for us to stay involved. It's great to see that y'all are so involved as well. In the Texas Scorecard, we try to help citizens so that we can take control, because that's a self-governing people, right? That's part of our obligation, is to actually be involved, because I think someone said before, they work for us, right? It's not the other way around. And if the employee's not doing a good job, That sometimes they need to be fired, right? Subbed out, yeah. So, and I think if we don't see these conservative priorities pass this next session, I think we're going to see a lot of that happening next spring. So, with that being said, happy to take a few questions if we've got some time for that.
We do. We have 15 minutes set aside for
Okay,
that.
perfect.
And just a moment, let me get the.
Talk about gambling.
Gambling. Okay, yes, gambling. Interesting. Gambling is a very interesting thing. So, last session, I'll tell you this. When you look at sessions past, you look at how much money is spent by individual lobbies. For a long time, the biggest lobbyist in Texas was AT&T. Like, they just hired a lot of lobbyists. And I guess it kind of makes sense. So, like, well, that's a big company. They, I guess, just have a lot of lobbyists. You look now at who it is, and it's the casinos. Casinos have completely taken over. They're the biggest. They hire the most lobbyists. They pay the lobbyists the most money. Basically, seemingly every lobbyist in Austin has a contract with the casinos, and specifically Las Vegas Sands, or sometimes you'll hear it called Texas Sands, as the group they have here. It's a group that, despite the name Las Vegas Sands, they don't own any casinos in Texas. Actually, the only casinos they have are in China and in Macau. So they don't even own any casinos there. But that's the group that's come in and tried to give a lot. I mean, they gave a lot of money, and they spent a lot of money on lobbyists this last session. And we had a vote on casinos in the House, and it failed to pass. It needed 2/3. It got under that, but and the Senate said they wouldn't consider it anyway. A lot of those members, Republicans specifically, that supported casinos in that vote were actually some of the same Republicans that got voted out this last time. So I think you actually look at the numbers, and I don't think casinos have the votes to pass the legislature this session. They did it last session, and their position is worse now. One thing I think we do need to be paying attention to, though, and that's not to say we shouldn't pay attention to the casino lobby because they're spending a lot of money, but something else we need to be paying attention to, in my estimation, is the sports gambling. Yes. And I used to actually think, like a lot of folks I've talked to, I personally thought, okay, I don't like any of this. The casinos are probably the worst, and like the sports gambling stuff on your phone, that's probably below it. That was kind of how it was in my mind. From the more that I've researched this, and we've looked a lot into gambling, to sort of maybe foreshadow some new projects we might have coming out in the future. But the more I've looked into it, I'm convinced that the sports betting at home is actually even worse. It's bad because it's at least with a casino you have to put your clothes on and go out physically to a place, right? Where you have a situation where people can lose money on their couch in minutes, right? All of it's very predatory. All of it's bad. I don't think any of it has the votes this session, but I was concerned. Governor Abbott did say a couple of days ago in an interview, said he wouldn't necessarily have a problem with sports betting, which I think with online sports betting, and which I think is I would certainly disagree with him on it. I think that if that issue does make it, again, I don't think it has the votes this session, thankfully, but I think that there's going to be a lot of work to do over the next couple of years heading into the session after this one to make sure people are educated on the harm that these actually cause, right? And so that's where I think gambling is right now in the Texas Legislature.
Okay.
Yes.
And destination resorts.
Destination resorts. That means casinos.
They're sending all those texts, and people don't know. They think, oh, it's a resort.
A destination resort,
fun,
right?
So.
Isn't it amazing? Like, why don't they, if they're so confident in their position, why don't they just say casino? They're gonna like mask it. Oh, a destination resort. Yeah. Yes.
My question is basically in regards to something that's been alluded to as economic development, and that economic development which hamstrings itself with casino gambling. I find that an offense. I find that the people don't know that, this will be good for the state. It's not good for the state. And there's enough crime and things going on as it is. And then another point, the Attorney General was in Montgomery County.
and he alluded it was from what used to be the speaker all the way back to Strauss. So there has not been a conservative leader in the Texas House, and that's why all of the items that the Republican Party votes on go nowhere in the House.
Yeah.
And I believe every speaker since Tom Craddock has been in favor of casino gambling.
Yeah, seemingly so. Yeah. To your point, the one thing that gives me, one of the things that gives me hope this cycle, I'm in an optimistic mood. Maybe it's just because of what we've been watching Trump do. But the one thing that does give me optimism this session is I do think a lot of these new folks coming in. You know, it used to be that you would have, in sessions past, maybe you'd have 2 or 3 people that you could really count on to be like, vote the way I would vote 99% of the time, right? That number is 2, maybe 3, 4, and you kind of have a little bit of a bigger coalition of people who are mostly with you. Maybe that's like 10 or 15 people. This time, I mean, I really think most of these freshmen have gone in and they've taken great votes. They've been leaders inside already, been leaders on these issues, and they haven't even started doing bills yet. And so that gives me optimism for sure. Yes.
Is there a chance the Texas Scorecard can identify and shed some light on who these rhinos are in our Texas Legislature?
That's a big reason why we exist. Yes, we do. Yes, that's like the center of, I would say, of our reporting on the Texas Capitol. And we've got our directory as well, I will note. We've got a directory on our website with all the lawmakers, as well as all their scores on different indexes. I'm not sure actually if the Eagle Forms is on there. If it's not, it should be added. But how they score, and every article we write, something we do that others don't, is when we mention a lawmaker, right? If we write about, I don't know, pick a random name, Will Metcalf, we link directly. We link to that directory so people know how they can actually get involved, right? And actually contact them, which I don't think anyone else does. Yes.
So Will was one, and Cecil Bell was the other one that both voted for Burroughs, and both allowed this to take place. Metcalf was the one that promoted it, and he's the one that stopped everybody from going into the gallery except for the friends and family of the state legislators, so that the rest of us that were there that day couldn't watch from within. We had to go to other rooms to be able to watch it. But the first person that got up to congratulate Burroughs after the vote was taken was Will Metcalf, that went over and high-fived him and gave him a hug.
Well, I get the legislature does not pass anything. In other words, the Senate cannot cooperate with them, and just stall the whole thing, and then have a special session to do what has to be done at the end of the summer.
Just stall and have a special session. Well, we've seen that sort of play out before, haven't we? I mean, I think this last year, they've got the 140-day regular session, right? But then the governor can call them back up to 30 days at a time for special sessions, and then they have to focus on issues he puts on the call. And so you can limit the scope of them. Last session, I think they had like 4 or 5. 5, was it? 5 special sessions. Hopefully it doesn't have to come to that, right? Yeah, hopefully it doesn't have to come to that. We'll see.
Report laser tag. Our vehicle leader for Pound Dog. Please report laser tag. Your game is about to begin. Thank you and have an incredible night.
Maybe we should all report to laser tag.
Yeah, maybe. Yes. Wait, time for one more.
Really appreciate the information you shared. Just one question or comment, I guess. It's really important how we choose our words and that we don't fall into using their words in ways that don't really mean what they mean. So when we use the word power sharing, there is no power sharing. You're either in charge or you're not in charge. So this concept of we entered into a power sharing agreement with the Democrats is baloney. Okay? So we need to make sure we don't fall for that, we don't agree to that. We've been conquered. Okay? And that's the message we want to run on in this next election. Is that you guys, meaning Metcalf and Cecil Bell, sided with the other side. And we have lost as grassroots conservatives. So I just encourage you to avoid using the word, we're in a power sharing agreement, and admit, we lost.
Yeah. Noted. All right. I'll take one more answer. Question here.
Todd Hunter, who used to be a Democrat.
Yeah, yeah.
I used to live in his district in Corpus Christi, and then he quit after about 3 terms, made about $2 million a year as a lobbyist for 6 years, while my friend Gene Seaman was the Republican representative, because we were in the Republican part of Oasis County. And then Todd turned around when Gene retired from it and ran as a Republican. So that tells you his roots. Okay? Now, my question is, this bill submitted by Todd, does it give the vice chairs a veto authority over bringing a bill up for vote in committee?
Yeah, so does it give them a veto authority? It doesn't give them veto authority over something that the chair wants to bring up. That would be incredible, right? I don't even think they could get all the Republicans that they got on board if they tried that, right? But what it does is it sort of does the opposite, which it allows them to, it allows them a little bit to have a veto authority in the sense that if they want to, they can fill up a committee schedule with the legislation they want to hear, right? Instead of what Republicans actually want to pass. And this is the first time we're going to see how this plays out, right? So we'll see if they use it to this extent. All of this right now is just sort of speculating based on the way the rules are written, but it does say that the chairs need to be in consultation with their vice chairs on what they schedule and this and that. And, I think that's why so many people are so frustrated. And also, I'll remind you, for all of this talk, there are these permanent subcommittees that Democrats could chair. So we could very well end up with a situation where Democrats are chairing committees still, but they're just called subcommittees. And they've got the more powerful vice chair position. So they kind of win on both fronts, right? Yeah.
Well, you mentioned about censuring candidates. Is there a number of censures that it takes to keep them off the Republican ballot?
Yeah. So the way the censure works, and somebody who is really involved in the party will know more about this, probably correct me, but the basic idea is that to be censured, the idea is there need to be 3 acts that are like a violation of the principles of the Republican Party. This voting with Democrats for Speaker would certainly be one, and then as session goes on, they kind of collect the other 3, right? And the idea being that people who are bad and need to be censured will wrap those up very quickly, right? Once that happens, and it's voted on at the county level, the SREC can essentially decide. There are levels of severity, so it doesn't automatically mean if someone's censured, they're removed from the ballot. They can decide if they're just going to be a slap on the wrist, or if they're going to, we're going to spend money against them in the race, or if we're going to take them off the ballot completely. That's all within the realm of deciding. So there's different levels of severity that can be decided, but it all starts at the local level and the local county level. Yes.
I just want to say that Glenn Withrow put out an article today. It was her report from the other night at the CEC, and she gives some information about what's going to happen in Montgomery County. So if you guys go to the county party website, nctxgop.org, you can read that, and you can see the resolutions that just came out from Texas GOP.
Yeah, there you go. So it all starts at the county level there, but. Again, thank you all so much. If you're not already following us at Texas Scorecard, please sign up for our Texas Minute email. And I'll be around here for a few minutes before I have to drive back to Austin. But I appreciate y'all having me. Thank you so much.
Okay, so story is yet to be written. Story of 5-day weekend. I want to read you another story though. talk about, this is in the Gospel of Matthew, comes out of about a Canaanite woman. Then came she and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. But he answered and said, it's not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to dogs. She said, true, Lord, yet the dogs eat the crumbs which fall from the master's table. I think we've been offered crumbs, and what if we just sit in our seats and do nothing, we won't even get crumbs. So it is incumbent upon each and every one of us. I don't care who your representative is. I already told you mine is Will Metcalf. I'm on Will's delete the email list unread. So anyway, I've got to find creative ways to reach out to Will Metcalf and let him know I'm watching. And each of you need to be with your representative. If you've got one of those, if you've got Steve Toth or Janice Holt, give them the attaboys. Keep a watch on them and let them know when they do something good. Give them a cheer. Give them a high five. Okay? And for when keep a watch on Cecil and Will. And hey, I actually liked one of Will's Facebook posts the other day when he did something that was right. If he does something right, let him know. And when he does something wrong, let him know. Okay.
Dale?
Yes, sir?
Will Metcalf does have a challenger. It's already been brought up, so you will have somebody going against him during this next election.
And there's a lot of discussions about a challenger for Cecil as well.
Amen.
So we'll see. I would say there's a lot of time till the primary, but the actual campaign season is just around the corner. You'll start hearing stuff, but in the meantime, let's focus on the legislative session, and let's let your representative, whoever that is, let them know that you're watching. There's nothing that will make them do right any more than to know that you're watching.